Well, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started, and we'll most likely have a few additional participants drop in. I would like to welcome you this morning to Variations in Community Engaged Scholarship. We have several people in the room as well as several participants at a distance, so we appreciate you being here. This will be a 3-hour workshop, but we'll definitely take a break for you, and feel free to leave if you need to get up or walk around. It will be just fine. Mm-hmm. There will be materials actually for this workshop that we will send you a link to a Google Drive that Diane was kind enough to send to us. So it will also include the PowerPoint, right, Diane? Great. And by the way, my name is Birgit Green. I'm the Assistant Vice Provost for Outreach and Engagement here at Texas Tech. Our office has existed since 2017. And our goal is to support faculty, staff, and students in their outreach and engaged scholarship activities. So throughout the year, we will offer workshops such as these. We also just started a faculty mentoring network, and if you are interested in joining us, there's a link on our website where you can apply for membership. Now I would like to introduce to you Dr. Diane Doberneck. Diane is the Director of Faculty and Professional Development at Michigan State University. And this is actually the second time she is at Texas Tech. We had her here last year, and she brings a wealth of information related to outreach and engaged scholarship. She provides professional development for faculty, staff, leaders in higher education, as well as graduate students. Let me see here, there's a lot of information. Programming under her leadership spans a continuum of low, mid, and high-level involvement learning opportunities, including virtual resources and workshops, with an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Her signature programs is a certificate program for graduate students, as well as postdocs. She also focuses on STEM education, graduate and community engaged art, partner projects, and the Sea Grant Extension Fellows Program. She is also a regular host of a summer intensive, and this year we had several faculty and staff members attend that, and that was a fantastic experience. So thank you for being here, Diane.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be back here. I had such a lovely visit last time and met so many wonderful people, and this is day 2 of a 3-day visit. And again, I have met so many wonderful people, so thank you for the hospitality. I also want to say thank you for the folks on Zoom. I know there are many reasons to not be on campus at this moment, and so I appreciate you coming from wherever you're coming from. We have a lot to cover today, and so when you get that Google Drive link and you open it up, I don't want you to be afraid. There are a lot of resources in there. I don't expect that you're going to read every one of them, but if I refer to something in my talk that you think was kind of interesting, it's probably in the Google Drive for you to look at later, as is the PowerPoint, which will be the very top document in case you don't want to wade through everything else. And I will echo what Birgit said. Learning is very hard if you're uncomfortable. Stand up, stretch, walk around, use the bathroom, get some more snacks. This is not distracting to me. I would rather have you be comfortable. That includes you folks at home too, or Zooming. Get up and move if you need to. So, let us do this. So I want to start with a thought kind of exercise to have you think about why community engagement is important to you. I think it's really important that each of us spend just a minute thinking about what brings you to this work, what interests you in this work. And so I'm going to let you just reflect for a moment this morning. Either jot it down or just keep it in your mind, and I'll give you just a moment or so. I think folks who are at home in Zoom land, if you want to think for a minute and eventually put it in the chat, that will be okay too. And then I'm going to tell you what the literature says about why people do this work. So let's just pause for a moment as we get started. Jot down your last couple thoughts there. What the literature says about why people come to this work are 4, 5, 6 main things. And as I go through the next several slides, I'd like you to think about which ones match you. You can have more than one. I suspect not all of them match you. And then I'm going to check in with folks at the end. So it's not like a quiz, but it's kind of like pay attention because there's a quiz in 6 slides. So there are institutional motivations. You come to this work because you work at Texas Tech, and Texas Tech has a mission to make resources available and knowledge available to serve the public good. I work at a land-grant university and a public serving university. I had the pleasure a couple of weeks ago to visit St. Norbert College in Green Bay, Wisconsin. That is a liberal arts Catholic college, and their entire mission has to do with service. So one reason people do this is you work at a place where this is a big deal. Another one is you're a researcher, and part of your research is strengthened and improved because you're conducting that research in conjunction with community partners. They're helping you refine questions that are more relevant, more nuanced. They're helping you be more rigorous in your work, and they're making sure your research work has a deeper reach when it's finished. Okay. So I will keep talking. So there are teaching and learning motivations, right? The reason that you are interested in community engagement is because having your students work with community partners is a really great way to teach your topic or your subject area, or it's a really great way for your students to learn other professional skills. Part of why you come to community engagement, outreach and engagement, the words you would like to use for that, is because it's really important for you to get those students involved in those conversations and do real world things. That's a motivation. Another motivation is a service and practice motivation. This means you're the kind of person that someone will come to you and say, boy, I'm a community person and I really have this issue I need some help sorting out. Can you help me sort this out? And you're very responsive to that. You're going to address a community issue. You're going to use your knowledge and your networks here at the university to kind of address something in the immediate moment. And this may also include some policy work. Hang on, Zoom folks, we're going to get this sorted out. There may be personal reasons. You personally may have a commitment to a particular people or a particular place. You feel very strongly about that. That speaks to who you are and how you've come up, and that you want to give back to a group that you feel a strong connection for. And then there is some motivations that we're talking about in this book. It's Publicly Engaged Scholars, the Next Generation of Engagement. And in this book, the authors talk about who the incoming groups of faculty members are into the academy. And what they point out is that for some of the incoming groups coming into the academy is our new professors and our junior professors, community engagement's not really optional. They did a lot of service learning when they were in K-12. They did a lot when they were maybe doing some graduate work. They're very active in their home communities. And when they come to the university, they're going to do outreach and engagement work. That's who they are. It's part of their identity. And they're not really going to leave that behind. And if they're asked to leave that behind, they're going to leave the university and go someplace else to work. So this becomes kind of a little stronger than I'm committed to a people and place. It is, this is who I am 100% of the time. So what I'd like to do is give everybody a moment and think about which ones really fit your motivation. Okay, so I'm going to ask for a show of hands. You can raise them high or you can raise them low. And in the chat, if you want to put which ones meet you, that would be okay. So how many feel like your reason to do outreach and engagement is an institutional reason? Yeah, I see some hands. All right. How many of you feel like it's a research reason? Your research is improved. How many of you feel like it is a teaching and learning reason? How many of you feel like it is a service and practice reason? Yeah. How many of you feel like it's a personal reason? It speaks to the people that you know and places you're committed to. Yeah. And how many of you feel like this is the kind of thing where it's so important to you? If someone said you may not do outreach and engagement ever again, you would think about maybe I need to work someplace else. Yeah, yeah. So that last category I want to point out, when that book first came out, I would ask that question, and there'd be like 2 hands in the room, and they'd be lifted like right about here, and I was the only person who could see them. And I'd be like, I see you, I see you. Now when I ask that question, their hands up. And it's not 1 or 2, it's 4 or 5 or 6 or a third of the room. And so that's really, really changing. How do we feel about our folks in the chat? Have they said things about what their motivations are? I know you've been fixing so many things.
I apologize. I'm not sure. This might be to a previous question. Valerie says permeates all areas.
Okay, Valerie says all of them. All right, Valerie. So the reason I bring motivations up at the beginning, you're like, okay, that's nice. She talked about that. Why does this really matter? This really matters because you may or may not have looked around, but people have different reasons for coming to this work. And so as you collaborate with your community partners, they also have different reasons for coming to the work. As you build out a team of people you collaborate with here on campus to do outreach and engagement, they may be coming from different reasons that are not your reasons. I think about the place that you work. As you collaborate with many different faculty, keeping in mind some of them are coming from a motivation that's really different than like the next faculty meeting you have. And so it's important to be aware of the fact that there is not one right motivation, and that as you have conversations about outreach and engagement, to recognize people are coming to it from different places that are very passionate and important to them, but also maybe different than your own. So I wanted to put that out there. I also wanted to show you some oak leaves because I think this is a helpful way of thinking and framing the rest of our workshop today. All of these leaves look very different from one another. Some have lots of lobes, some are rounded, and some are pointy. Some don't seem to have any lobes at all. If you look at the acorn, some have big caps and some have little caps. The nut part, it's probably a better word for that, it's bigger and shorter and rounder and fatter. They're all oak leaves though. They're all from oak trees. So outreach and engagement is very much the same. Things that fall under the outreach and engagement umbrella might look really different from each other, may still be very, very valuable. They still have a thread of things in common. They're still all from oak trees, but they may look profoundly different from each other. And that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this morning, with a couple of things in mind. One, to help you think about what is your oak leaf, what is your particular version, what that looks like, how you can articulate that more clearly, because that helps you in many ways. But also like thinking with the other way on, the other hat on. As you collaborate with others in outreach and engagement, they may be coming with a slightly different version of what they want to do and expect. And to be aware of the fact that there is a lot of diversity in the ways in which outreach and engagement look. They still all have a common thread. They're still all oak trees, but they may not look very much alike. So I wanted to kind of help you think about that. And I do believe we walked by an oak tree on their way to our office here today, which makes me happy. And it doesn't look like any of those. It looks its own special way. So I will use today the term community engaged scholarship as an umbrella term. I may also say outreach and engagement, and I kind of mean the same thing by both of them. This field is fraught because our language has not solidified. And I think some days that's great and beautiful that each discipline has its own language and phraseology and it makes sense to folks. And in other days, I think this has got to make it really hard if you're coming into community engagement and trying to figure out what it means. Like there isn't even a good set of keywords to do a library search with. Like it's called co-management and natural resources, and it's called this other thing, and it's just so hard. So I think it's really important as we think about the beautiful wide array of potential ways to talk about community engagement and ways to do community engagement, that we move away from everything looks the same and we don't have a one-size-fits-all way of thinking about it. The idea about clarifying your particular variation helps you find others who are doing work similar to you. So you have some buddies as you do your work, some thought partners and reflection partners and people to bounce ideas off of. Clarifying your variation also helps you get a better handle on how you might publish your work and share it in academic spaces. So these are some long-term goals that might happen. So often what happens when you talk about community engagement and say, I'm doing a community project, everybody imagines what that is in their own head. They have a mental model of what a community project is. The thing is, everybody's mental model is different. So when I say I'm doing a community project, you don't know which community project I'm doing because you imagined your community project, basically. When in fact, I was thinking about the purple dragonfly. If I don't give you enough details, you don't know I was talking about the purple dragonfly and not the blue race car. And so part of the goal here today is to think about how to talk about your work with enough details that when you're speaking to somebody else and they have imagined blue race car, or you really mean purple dragonfly, they are like, oh wait, it's not the blue race car. This is a different thing. Let me listen more carefully. So that's part of why we're talking about this. So enough of introductions. Community engaged scholarship varies really widely. There are at least 15 different ways my community engagement project is different than your community engagement project. It's a lot of different ways. The good news is we already talked about one of them, which is number 15, motivations. We are not going to talk about all 15. Take a deep breath, I'm not that crazy. But we are going to talk about a few big ones that will help you out. So let's start with some language. I always like to start with this because I know on my campus, despite the work that my office does, constantly talking about outreach and engagement and really important things and definitions and ideas, there is still a fair amount of, I maybe would use the word confusion or maybe just inconsistency. On a nice day, I would say inconsistency. Some of our departments call outreach engagement service. Some call everything to do with the community outreach. Some departments call everything engagement, even though it might not be. So we keep working on that. I want to let you know that the language has shifted over time in higher education. And I want to also let you know this is how I'm going to use those words in the rest of our workshop. So at least for a couple hours today, we all know what I'm talking about. And you could laugh and think about, well, when I go back to my home department, we use this other word anyhow. That's okay. I'm not trying to convince you these are the best words. These are just my words. So for service, when I say simply service, I'm talking about all the good things you do in your job or your role to help the university work or your discipline. You serve on an admissions committee, you serve on a college-wide sustainability committee, you help chair a session at your disciplinary conference. These are all really good things you do. They may or may not be related to your academic field. And that's a key thing. If your disciplinary expertise is not at play, it might be service. Please do service. Do not come away from here saying, that lady from Michigan State told us we don't need to do any more of this stuff. Your colleagues will not like you. You will not have a good review of promotion and tenure because collegiality does count, right? But this isn't actually community engaged scholarship. Okay, second distinction. And I've come to know about this more from folks I collaborate with in STEM fields. There is an internal collaboration that happens. My department is going to collaborate with your department. Everybody's still on campus. Or one of the NSF funded grants I'm on, my department at my university is going to collaborate with 3 other similar departments at 3 other universities. We are still all academics talking to academics. So this type of collaboration internal to the academy is really great. Team science happens. You get nicer grants because you're doing a bigger kind of thing. I get that. But again, you're not really talking to people beyond the borders of the academy. So this also would not be a thing I would consider to be outreach or engagement. What I would consider to be outreach is where you have some things and you want to share that information or knowledge with people beyond the borders of your university. So outreach comes with this idea that there is an interaction with the public. That public can be defined in a number of ways, which we'll touch on in a minute. And that it really is based on the idea that we know some things and the people we're talking to do not know those things. And we're going to share that information out. This centers the knowledge making and the knowledge holding here on campus and kind of minimizes the knowledge out in the rest of the world. And it's really an important thing to do. So again, don't walk away from here saying, never do service. And please don't walk away from here saying, outreach is a bad thing. Outreach is a great thing. It is really important in specific situations. And so while I might spend more time talking about engagement today, outreach has a really important place. And so I don't want that to be brushed under the rug. Engagement, however, is kind of different. Engagement has to do with work that is done in conjunction with outside partners. And it's based on an entirely different premise that is maybe a little bit radical. I don't know if you feel like it's radical or not, but it actually says something like, we at the university know things, and people out in the community also know things. And we want to listen to their knowledge and bring their knowledge into the process. Now, if you're like some of us who went to undergraduate, went to graduate school once, went to graduate school another time, you have been spending a lot of time at a place that says you are now the expert and the top person in your field. And if you wrote one of those big book reports, which is how I named my dissertation, I made it much less scary, call it a big book report. You are the expert in that one little arcane thing, right? You're the top person in the entire world who knows that thing. So stepping away from that expertise a little bit to say other people might be experts in their life world, their experience, what they know about how they go through the world, what they know as a practitioner, makes you step away from your expertise just a smidgen to allow them to be experts too. We're not saying drop your expertise because you do know really important things, but to give some room to other people's knowledge to come in and flow into your process. So engagement really focuses on that. So outreach is more of a one-way relationship, although I would advocate you're still talking to your partners about what is an effective way to do the outreach. Engagement is much more of a two-way exchange, and that collaboration and partnering looks different than more of an outreach kind of perspective. Both are really important. So if you like a picture, this is sometimes helpful. There is a continuum in a way. And if you look at that up and down green arrow, boy, I'm gonna have to do this way. To your left, what you see is not outreach and engagement because you don't have people beyond the borders of your college university campus. And to the right would be outreach and engagement. Now, things can be a little more outreachy or a little more engagement-y. That is actually a continuum. It is not a binary. It is outreach or engagement. You can be closer to engagement or closer to outreach. You might have a really complicated project that has outreach elements in it and engagement elements in it. Maybe it's the engagement that helps develop the outreach pieces, but then the outreach pieces are very much a one-way communication. So I'd like to pause for just a second. Well, yeah, I'll pause for a second. Are there questions about the difference between service, between outreach, between engagement? Does that make sense to people? Like head nods, thumbs ups? All right. Lindsay, does anyone seem like, what did Diane just tell us in the chat? We are so confused now.
Not yet.
Okay, that's excellent. Because I really didn't want to confuse anybody at this point, but it's possible. There are other conceptualizations of this continuum, of the outreach to engagement continuum. I happen to really like this one. It's from the International Association of Public Participation. And I will have to tell you that every time I see this, they call themselves IAP2. but that 2 should really be a superscript. It's P squared, not P2. It just bugs me. So one of the things that's really cool about this is the pictures. So if you look at the pictures, you can see on the outreach side of the continuum, the arrows go from the big circle to the little circles. And as you move further along towards engagement, the arrows now have bi-directional arrowheads. There's a back and forth. And the role of the expert, the big circle person, starts to get smaller. And so by the time you get over here, there's all this back and forth collaboration and exchange, and people are talking and reciprocity, and I know some things and you know some things. And over here, you're not even sure who the expert is. This is a set of relationships that's highly collaborative. So again, just this concept of things could be a little on the outreach side, so a little bit more on the super, super engaged side, and there's steps along the way. I wanted to share that with you. I also would like to share this picture with you. This is a adaptation that I was part of a team to help work on this adaptation for some biologists that were working on harmful algal blooms, which is something that happens in coastal waters, but also inland lakes, where if the temperature is a certain way, it just makes the conditions right for this algae to come out. It's a blue-green algae, and it's toxic. It's very toxic to pets. Dogs will die if they swim in the water very quickly, and it's not fixable. But also people with asthma have a hard time breathing. It's not good for fishermen. If you're a place, and I'm not sure this is common in Texas, but if you're a place that takes your municipal water out of a lake and cleans it and then puts it in the pipes for the rest of your town, this can shut down your water supply. So an interesting grant. We did the outreach engagement continuum. We kind of changed the words from IAP2 because to fit what we needed. But what we did up here in those big white spots with those big letters is think about the importance of alignment. Who are your partners? Why are they participating in your project? What is the purpose of that participation? What are you doing together? And what collaboration techniques are you using to facilitate all of that? And to talk about an alignment across the who, the what, the who, the why, the what, and the how. So I'll just kind of leave that with you and maybe just personally share that not so long ago, I was on a project that for reasons before I came onto the project, they picked the how first. And the how drove the rest of the project. And it was the worst project I've had in my more than 20-year career in community engagement. And we have been thinking very hard about like, why did this just work so badly? And it would be very easy to say COVID interrupted it, but the problem is that was not the problem. Yes, that was part of it. But the real problem was somebody picked the how and then tried to make everything align to the how versus thinking who are our partners, why do we need them to participate, what do we want to do together, and then let's pick a how in service to that, aligning to that. And so I would leave it with you that while this is a continuum and it helps you think about like where you are, it also helps you think about aligning through your project. And from the School of Hard Knocks, this turns out to be actually a fairly important thing. The IA2 spectrum does not talk about that. It talks about the relationships between you and your partners, which is kind of the second part, the why. Why are they participating? But the IAP2 spectrum does not bring in who the partners are, what their characteristics are, what they prefer as part of that decision making. Okay. Let me pause and talk about, just pause for a second and think about continuums, outreach to engagement. You're feeling okay about that concept? I love these head nods, guys. This is really helpful. So, I would like to also talk to you about a purple diagram. You might get the idea, I like purple things. It's true. We have, in the field of outreach and engagement, a lot of big, important institutional definitions. There have been commissions, national commissions that have written definitions. There are institutions that write definitions. We have one at Michigan State. You have one in the works here that you're writing and talking about and drafting. And I think those are really important to have a big statement that sets the tone and says, as an institution, this is what outreach and engagement means to us, and this is why we do that. Really important to have that. However, I have found that those definitions are a little hard to work with, like, as a person, because they're written for the institution and its relationship to the general public, the people that it serves. They're not really necessarily written like as guidance to you when you wake up on Tuesday morning, like, I'm going to do an outreach project. They to me, they don't come down to that level exactly. And this is part of how I've come to that conclusion is for 14 years of running the graduate certification in community engagement and teaching those institutional definitions, my graduate students really struggled to grasp those and do anything with them. And the more I thought about it, I couldn't quite grasp them either. And so the purple diagram came to be. So the purple diagram helps me think about the key elements of outreach and engagement. And if you go back to that picture of the oak tree leaves, this is what makes it an oak tree, no matter what it looks like. If you've got these three elements, it's likely outreach and engagement. So let me walk you through the three from the diagram, and then we're going to dive deeper into this morning. Okay, so what this says is that you have foundational scholarship that informs and guides your work. You're working with theories, conceptual frameworks, and best practices. That's guiding your experience with your community partners. Those community partners are contributing their knowledge, their wisdom, their experience. They're helping share their local knowledge, their practitioner knowledge, their indigenous knowledge with you and informing the project. And the flow of that theory and community partner wisdom is mixing together where something happens. And then from that collaboration come scholarly pieces. Those scholarly pieces might be for an academic audience, or they might be for a public audience. So in my mind, it really boils down to those three elements. Is there foundational scholarship guiding your work? If it's not, pretty hard to call it community engaged scholarship. Let's put that out there. Do you have partners that you are listening to? And how is what they're saying shaping your work? Now, if it's outreach, it might be shaping the work a little bit. And if it's engagement, it might be shaping the work a lot. But you still need to have those partners beyond the borders of your campus. And as you're doing things together, are pieces that are grounded in that scholarship and that community partner wisdom coming out the other end of that process. To me, it's those three pieces. From there, it takes off and can look a million different ways. But as a community engaged scholar, you should be able to say to others, I'm doing this amazing project. And it's guided by these theories, conceptual frameworks, or best practices. You should be able to say in your foundational scholarship. You should be able to name your partners and say, here's what I've learned from them and how that has shaped our project. And you should be able to say, here's what's coming out of our collaboration. Okay, we are going to dive much deeper into this, but let me just, is this kind of making sense? Yes? Okay, I haven't said anything to anyone who've gone like, well, that's not true. Like I haven't like raised any hackles yet. No. Okay, and I got a thumbs up from our Zoom folks. Great. So, have any of you maybe heard of somebody being told community engagement is fluffy? It's not real work. Anyone ever had a criticism raised about like, well, that doesn't really count. That's kind of just messy and like not really robust enough to be scholarship. I see a couple people smiling. I see a couple of heads nodding. You've probably heard of the criticism if you actually haven't heard it yourself. So that's just not true. If you do a good job with your outreach and engagement, you are likely following all the principles of traditional scholarship, which are on the next couple of slides. And so when you go back and get your Google Drive and pull up this PowerPoint, the next 3 slides are going to be your best friend. You just put them in your pocket and pull them out when you need to, when you hear that. Because traditional scholars follow principles that bound to scholarship, even if they don't realize they're doing it. And you, as a community engaged scholar, are following the same principles. So this is how you say, no, wait a minute, I am doing the same things you're doing. And those things are, your work requires a level of expertise. That's that theory that's guiding what you're doing. You are doing it in a scholarly manner. You are following the steps that go and inform scholarship. There are certain ways you do research. There are certain ways you do high quality teaching and learning. There are certain ways that you collaborate with people on digital archives. There are certain formats for how libraries help with the community engagement. There are ways we do this. You follow those ways. That's number 2. Number 3 is that you document what you're doing so it's shared outable. You're not just doing it by yourself, but you actually follow those processes in a way that is clear and transparent. Your traditional scholarly colleagues do these things. They may not think about them, but they're doing them. So are you. Your work would have significance beyond the individual context. That is, as a scholar, you're doing things that are important and innovative, and they're making a difference in the bigger picture and can be shared out. Now, if we have a deeply qualitative researcher in the room, you are allowed to argue with me on this point. But generally speaking, traditional scholarship follows these guides. As it does with number 5, there is peer review. People look at your work besides you and say, this is solid, this is good, just follow the rules. All community engaged scholars do these things if they're doing a good job. And all traditional scholars do these things if they're doing a good job. You're doing the same things. And then Kathy Jordan in 2007 for community engaged scholars wanted to make sure and emphasize another couple points. She said that there should be reflection in what you do. You should think about the community engagement process and be really thoughtful and reflective about what worked and what didn't work and what you could do better. Number 7, I think, is worded vaguely, but this means you are clear about what you did in the project and what your partner did in the project, and you don't take credit for their contributions. You're specific about who had which roles. And then number 8, which bothers me that it's 8, is that you're doing a job that's ethical. If you're following these 8 scholarly kind of ways we do good scholarship, you can do that as a traditional scholar and as a community engaged scholar. So if you have a traditional scholar who's somehow saying, that's not good work, oh, that's fluffy, that doesn't meet our standards, I think you can say back to them and say, wait a minute, let's talk about those standards. I'm meeting those standards, just like you're meeting those standards. And if you would rather not go through the 8 points, but have a picture that looks like this is really what I would put in my back pocket if I were you. Traditional scholars are judged meritorious by these types of criteria, which we just talked about. As a community engaged scholar, you are doing these things and you are doing more. So if you think about having clear goals for your project, you have clear goals that make sense in your discipline, in your field, and goals that are acceptable and make sense to the community. As a community engaged scholar, you are thinking about, do I have the background? Do I understand the methods? Do I understand how to teach this well in your content area? And you're talking to your community partners and saying, have I done enough homework about your circumstances? Do I understand you as a community? Am I prepared to engage well and do this work well? You're doing 2 sets of preparation. You might not think about it that distinctly, but it's there. Going down the list, are you generating outcomes or products or pieces that are useful for your discipline and also make sense and are useful for your community? I think if you look at community engaged scholarship this way, and you think about what we say is solid scholarship, it is really hard for somebody to actually, if they think about it, say, that is fluffy work you're doing. That is not up to standards. Because it's actually up to their standards and the community standards. And you are dancing between the two, bringing the two into collaboration. You're working very hard to meet those standards of excellence and quality for both groups, your discipline and your community. You're doing a more solid job of your work than maybe your traditional scholars. So let that sink in for a second, because I know that there are some places where community engaged scholars get a little flack for what they're doing. They get a little criticism. And I want you to kind of feel confident that if you're following and doing a good job as a community engaged scholar, you should just let that roll off your back. They kind of don't know what they're talking about because you're doing a really good job because you're following these standards. So let me pause for a minute. Does anybody have questions about thinking about this in terms of rigor and scholarship and how you do a really good job with your work? Yeah, we have a question in the chat.
Yes. How would you suggest to gather tangible outcomes that are not easily measured, such as student learning?
Well, so there are tangible ways to measure student learning. And so one of the things I would say is to find a buddy in the College of Education and have a conversation with your buddy in the College of Education and say, so you guys, one of the major things you do is figure out how to measure student learning. What tips do you have for me? What ideas do you have for me? So that would be the first thing, particularly since this example was student learning. However, there are questions like, really cool things are happening. How do we make sure we document and collect that, right? And so you might have people on your campus who are really good at evaluation. We have a couple people on my campus. They're in different departments, and sometimes they're in public administration. We'll just say that. Go have a conversation with them and say, you know, I've got this project. I'm starting to see these really amazing things happening, and I want a way to capture them and document them. You know, and what I will say is there are very standard go-to practices for evaluating outcomes, but there is also a growing amount of creativity in that field. For a long time, there were just some set ways we captured outcomes. You had a pre-survey and a post-survey, and you looked across the two, and then you figured out if there was an amount of change. Okay, so that's nice, but that means you have to actually know ahead of time what you think the changes will be. And if something really amazing happened, you didn't know that ahead of time to put that on the pre-survey, so you missed some stuff, right? So we've got some people in the evaluation realm that are finding some really fascinating ways to document those unintended or surprise consequences that really sometimes are the parts that are most meaningful. And there is an approach to evaluation called developmental evaluation that focuses a lot on like very early outcomes. So those would be some suggestions I have. It is a good question, and it's a really important question. All right, I'm going to move on a little bit. So I mentioned foundational scholarship, which I'm going to tell you is honestly a term I made up. You didn't hear that in any of your classes. You're like, what is this thing she's talking about? But I needed a term of the people who've come before you. You are standing on the interesting things they have known and have learned about, and you are building your work off of their work. Later on, we're going to talk about you publishing work, which means that you are contributing to foundational scholarship, and people can stand on your shoulders next. But the idea here is that the work you're doing is informed by these theories, conceptual frameworks, or best practices. And I use all three of those because different fields have different ways of codifying their knowledge. In very edgy fields that are pushing the envelope, a lot of stuff is still like in the best practices literature. It hasn't made it into like theory with a capital, all bold. So all of that is important and good. And if you're doing some really kind of on the edge work, you might not have a single theory, but a couple of things to patch together to inform your work. Totally okay in community engaged scholarship. So as far as I can tell, a community engaged scholar, each and every one of you, including those of you in Zoom, might draw upon scholarship from 8 different areas. So let me talk them through for a second. One area has to do with the issue at hand. I have 3 examples in a minute, so this is a little heady, but it will make sense in the examples. Another area you might draw the scholarship from is your discipline or field. You may have, as a sociologist, certain things that sociologists think about, certain theories you draw upon, and so you're going to use those. You might draw upon the scholarship of engagement. I think most people here haven't even thought to do that. Every time I get this talk, people are like, there's a scholarship of engagement. I'm like, yeah, you know, there's like about 37 different journals publishing community engagement, not including the disciplinary ones. So yeah, you could like nose around and find an actual scholarship of engagement to help your engagement. There's also scholarship of teaching and learning. So this is where you call up your colleagues in the College of Education and say, can I take you for a cup of coffee? I need some help in thinking about the best ways to teach this group and how to evaluate it. There is the scholarship around the population. So this is really an important thing I've been thinking a lot about. Every group that you're collaborating with in the public, we know some things about how those groups operate. What's important to them, what's useful to them. There are people who study those groups. So read something about the people you're collaborating with. That will be very helpful. You can also, of course, rely on their knowledge and expertise about their life too. There is knowledge about the paradigm or the approach, the big picture epistemology or the research paradigm, or your learning theory that you are thinking about for your teaching and learning. There's also scholarship around those specific techniques that help you think through what is the best way, what is that how for engaging my group. And then there's scholarship around evaluation. Thank you to the person on Zoom for bringing that up, and assessment and reflection. So a community engaged scholar for each project you might do might have a different blend of some of these. I am not ever advocating you have all of these in one project. This is not a checklist. This is a brainstorming list. Some are gonna fit, some you're gonna try on and say, that is awful, I don't want that. Okay, so let's think about some examples. Because I think community engagement is best explained through examples, to be quite honest. So this example is pretty exciting to me. This was an example of a graduate student. I was on her dissertation committee. She was in the Department of Forestry. And now, Dr. Christine Carmichael was approached by a nonprofit organization in the city of Detroit. The nonprofit organization was a tree planting nonprofit organization. So its major mission was to plant trees throughout the city to help with the urban tree canopy, to help with air quality, to have the roots help with water runoff and prevent some flooding. And that a long time ago, the city of Detroit was known as a tree city. It was known for its gorgeous trees. And then things kind of happened and we don't have so many trees. So this organization plants these trees and they plant them in the strip. And it's occurred to me, I don't know if you have these strips here. So you have the road, then you have the grassy strip, then you have the sidewalk, then you have your lawn. Do you have the grassy strip here? Might not be grassy.
Some neighbors do.
Some neighbors, okay. So they're planting trees in that grassy strip, which I'm sure has a name. Grassy strip. We're gonna call it grassy strip. Or the strip that doesn't have grass in it anymore. And there are neighborhoods that are like, we don't want your tree. I don't want trees, get away, no trees for me. And this nonprofit organization loves trees and loves planting trees and is like really bothered and cannot figure out why they have no tree requests. So this becomes the dissertation topic. Okay, so my student, think about that foundational scholarship. She's looking at, from her discipline or field area, right? Urban forestry, she's thinking about community forestry, she's thinking about all those environmental benefits of having lots of trees give you. She's also using some interdisciplinary theory. She's looking at political ecology and critical race theory. She then, for her research, is looking at a community engaged research paradigm. And then for her technique, she's using this really interesting technique called heritage narratives. And to be honest, I've never heard of that before, but heritage narratives are where you sit down and you talk to people about the story and the things they know and believe about a certain thing. And you tap into kind of in an anthropological way, their feelings, their thoughts, ideas that have been handed down to them about a particular thing. And you tap into that community wisdom and, you know, collective thinking in a way that like a survey won't get to. So my point here is to let you know, she combined these types of foundational scholarship. everybody wants to know what she found out, which is the neighborhoods that were predominantly saying, I don't want your trees, were African American neighborhoods. And part of what the rub was, which is a very understandable rub, is that people wanted a say about what tree was planted in their front yard that then they were responsible for taking care of forever. And this organization was not giving people choices. In its passion of trees, it was kind of trampling over people's preferences and just giving them trees. And so if you really liked your car nice and shiny and perfect, you probably didn't want a tree that had berries, that had birds, that made messes on your car. Or if you were an older person, you probably didn't want a tree that left tons of leaves that you had to rake. You probably needed more choices and you needed more respect for who you are and what you wanted. And the nonprofit organization in its passion did not understand that. So a good study, which I'll tell you about a little bit more later. Here is a teaching and learning example, and again, focusing on the blend of foundational scholarship. So this is a faculty member who has a service learning course with pre-health students, and she's partnering with a Ronald McDonald House, which some of you may know is the house that you get to stay in near the hospital when your child's so sick that you have to be near the hospital with them the whole time. And so this faculty member really focused on an area of scholarship I'm not familiar with, which is the narratives about health. I thought it was interesting that it wasn't narratives about illness, it was narratives about health. She also tapped into the literature about ethics, especially the ethics of working with children and families who are not well. 2 layers there. And then they used a technique called photo voice, where her students worked with the young children who were sick and their families to take pictures about what it meant to be healthy and well and to work on that, and then to write reflections. And those got bound into books at the end of every year, and some are published in English and some were published in Spanish. So this is a way that foundational scholarship helped shape that service learning experience. This is a community engaged service and practice. So not service that you're just volunteering and doing something, but actually the community engagement has to do with it. These are very popular weekend food backpack programs where young people who do not have enough food and they get free breakfast and free lunches, when you come home on the weekend, we pretty much know you're probably hungry. And you're not the only one hungry in your household. Usually people let the kids eat before the adults eat, so they're hungry people in the whole household. So the idea is to send kids home on a Friday with a backpack of food to get them through the weekend. And usually not just them, but like out of the household. So this was a social work student, and so her background had to do with the topic, so food insecurity and hunger, coming from her disciplinary field, what we know about programming in low-income housing communities. She also focused on effective practices for engaging middle school students. So this is about the population. Those of you who've had a middle school student, they are not the same as high schoolers. They are their own little special group of people. And then she used developmental evaluation. This is the thing I was referring to where it's a form of evaluation that you do very early in a project to capture the underlying dynamics. And you do that early before you even have enough to ask the questions for formative along the way evaluation or summative at the end evaluation. Turns out this was a really important foundational scholarship choice because there were 2 problems with this project pretty much right away that they were able to fix. Problem number 1, we do not have any physics people in the room, right? No physics people? I bet we just have practically smart people in the room. Can you put 2 backpacks on a middle school kid when one of them is filled with canned food?
Technically.
All over.
Front,
back? May they bounce them?
my child plays cello.
So you figured it out.
Yes.
This is good to know.
Celeste wants you to know that she is a physics person.
Yay, physics people. Thank you, Celeste. I have a soft spot in my heart for physics people. Michigan State has so many physics people now. Way more than when I first started working there. You know the other problem with this? Does anybody want to be the kid with 2 backpacks on Friday on the bus?
Yeah.
No. No one wants to be that kid, ever. This is not workable. So developmental evaluation catches this really quickly, and they're like, we got to take the kids out of the equation. Backpacks will be at the community center, and a grown-up can come get them. Backpacks have to come back to the community center on a Wednesday, and they'll be repacked for Friday. And we take the kids out of the equation. So no one's on the bus with 2 backpacks feeling completely mortified. And the grown-ups can be grandparents or aunties or somebody that's with the kid. It doesn't have to be the mom or the dad. Developmental evaluation helped catch that and fix that. So my point with these 3 slides and these 3 examples is, depending on what your project is, you might have a different mix of foundational scholarship, and that is really good. That's why all the oak leaves don't look the same, because you're matching them to the project, you're matching them to the people, you're matching them to the type of work, if it's a research or a teaching and learning or a community engaged service and practice. I wanted to add this, and then I'm going to pause in just a second so we can do an activity together. If you're in a field that, again, is kind of pushing the edge a little bit, and you need to figure out how to summarize that foundational scholarship for your project, it is perfectly okay to look at programs that are in practice, how they're written up, what elements they have, to summarize the programs in practice, and then to talk about how that programming practice has influenced your project. I think for some of you, again, what's happening is in the practice field, and it's a little hard to imagine how you summarize that as foundational scholarship. So this was the cover article for this journal that's a community engagement journal. I wanted to share that out as an example. There are a couple other things in your giant Google folder. One is by Cresswell and Poth that talks about interpretive frameworks for community engagement. There's this other one. You ever read an article where you're like, oh, I wish I'd written that article? This article is so good, and I've never met these people, but I've got to figure out how I can meet at least Lisa Vaughn, because this article focuses on, in a community engagement process, there are many steps. And at each step, how you might bring collaboration into that step. And then she pushes it a little further and says, here are some really cool techniques to help with that step. So it helps you jog your imagination of like all the different moments in the process you can invite collaboration in. But then some examples, and her list of examples are things I've never heard of. Like for one of them is a photo novella approach to doing community storytelling. And I'm like, I kind of think I know what that word means, but this sounds really cool. So I love that. For our service learning folks in the room, this is a really great book chapter that goes over theoretical frameworks for informing how you might go about your service learning. And again, it's the kind of thing that gives you, here's a way, here's a way, here's a way, and you, of course, pick the way that matches your work. And there is a worksheet in your folder that helps you with the brainstorming. And here's where I would like to pause. I feel like it's a little hard to pair up the way we're seated. So maybe try anyhow. I think if people are willing to get up and move a little bit in 2s or 3s, I would love for you to have a discussion with one another about what foundational scholarship you have used or you were likely to use. And our folks on Zoom, I guess this is an individual kind of reflection, but let's come back to our seats for a second. And I'd like to kind of repeat a little bit of what's in the chat.
So, Rana says she is an interior design student, so she hasn't used anything yet, but what she's looking to use and what she thinks she'll use is foundational, teaching and learning, and community engagement.
Okay, so we have an interior design student in the Zoom. That's pretty exciting.
Yes. And then we have service learning and students to apply technical concepts, and he's working with ag producers.
Oh, yes, ag producers. I don't know about your state, but that's a very important thing in the state of Michigan. Super big, important thing in the state of Michigan. And I'm gonna guess it's really important in Texas, given the fact that when I flew into Lubbock, I saw fields And when I watched the local news today, there was the farm report as part of the weather report. So I'm gonna assume that's a really important area. There's really interesting information about different ways to collaborate with farmers and different ways that for that particular, depending on which group of farmers you're working with, ways in which to connect with them and listen to them that are more effective than other ways. So I think that's a very exciting area. Okay, so did anybody have trouble with this conversation? Like no one had any theory to think about at all? Like we don't know what this is. Did anybody stumble? No stumbling, no one would ever say they stumbled. Okay, were there challenges in having this conversation and thinking stuff through? Oh, I see some head nods with challenges. I would love to hear a couple challenges from the group. Okay, so there were challenges and we don't want to talk about them.
It was like implementation is difficult, maybe.
Yeah.
Like the theories are there.
Yeah, okay, I like this.
But implementation might be difficult.
Yeah, so we've got some theories, but like how we actually get them implemented might be a little bit challenging in our work. And that is a really good thing to think about. One of the things I did not say when I introduced myself is that I review for about 7 different community engagement journals. And I very often, like once a year, will get a long article, it's nice, and there's an entirely beautifully written lit review, and then there's the rest of the article. And it's absolutely unclear how anything in the lit review touched the project. Like it just, we had the theory and we had the project. It was very hard to weave them together or connect them together. So I guess I will answer that by saying this is a thing that people are challenged by a lot of times. And so there are different ways to think about that. You know, does the theory lend a lens to a certain thing? Does, if you're doing research, do you pay attention to some things more than others because the theory says to do that? The trouble with the trees, when the theory was critical race theory and political ecology, was let's think about race in relationship to this project. That might show us something that we would have missed if we weren't thinking about it that way. And in that particular project, you would have missed the whole thing, I think. It helps you with questions, it might help you with analysis, it might help you with the writing up. Sometimes the theory comes in late in the project. You like come back to it and say, here's how the theory held true. Or more likely, here's how the theory held kind of true, but not 100%. And here's why I think my situation stretched that theory a little bit or needed that theory to be revised. Kind of common with community engaged scholars. Yes.
This is a contrarian thought.
I love a contrarian thought.
In all 3 of your examples, which were very good, you had at least 4 different theories.
Yes.
Okay, that to me is a bit overwhelming. And so if that's the model, no thank you. And I think for most people it will be.
Sure.
And your last statement talked about evolving theories. So can you talk about that just a little bit? Because it sounds like we're spending a whole lot of time on foundational scholarship. Not that that's wrong, but it could be overwhelming to the extent of a deterrent.
Yes. So 2 things. Thank you for the contrarian comments. So part of why I used those examples that had a lot of foundational scholarship in them was so that list of 8 items, you could see what was meant by the list of 8 items. So those were like super robust examples to help illustrate what foundational scholarship might be. And it may not be that your project has 4 items or 3. It may be that you've got like a theory or 2, or you're drawing upon different things. It's helpful to kind of brainstorm that, but it may be that you don't want to go that deeply into it. It may be too that as you progress as a community engaged scholar, you have a couple of theories that always guide your work. Like your work is just always framed by this particular thing. And then as the situation changes, you pull in 1 extra thing for each of the situations over the course of your career. So good points. In my practice, I have found that when I have theory guided projects, very often the theory comes from people who've come before me, lots of experiences, and they kind of distill that up into something that's broad and general, which is a good way you get a theory. But very often in my experience, when I take that broad general theory down to my particular community context, it doesn't quite fit exactly. It fits a little bit, it fits mostly, but there's a place where it rubs or something else happens that's not accounted for in the theory. And so my point about evolving theory is use theory to guide your work, great. But if it turns out in the end, part of it wasn't 100% on the mark, talk about that in the discussion as you write that up. That will contribute to the discussion in your field, and it may provide new theories to evolve over time. You don't have to evolve a new theory in every project. That would be crazy and hard. But I think when we generate theory, it is up in this generalized category, which is how we got to the theory. But when you come down to a particular community context, it might not be a perfect fit. There may be other things happening with those community partners. And I wanted to make sure if people tried a theory on and use it for their project and it didn't work out quite right, that doesn't necessarily mean you did something wrong. It may be that you have discovered a newish, partially new thing, and to be open to those surprises.
Yeah, I found myself doing that a lot. And what happens is that you begin with a big theory, and then with your work, you're kind of adding little bitty pieces to that big theory. And that's how, you can think about it.
And those little itty bitty pieces in your theory kind of come over a number of projects, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So you do another project, and then you find another little piece, and then another project you find, and then so the big people in the field, they kind of see that, and then they start talking about it, and
And then eventually a new thing comes from those little bitty pieces adding up, I think.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, I hope that helps a little. We have talked a lot about foundational scholarship, and I bring this up because when I review those articles, it's sometimes just not there. And people struggle with this a little bit. I think our newer scholars to the field struggle with this a little bit more than our more established scholars. By standing on the shoulders of the people who came before you in the thinking world, right, that will help you then professionally with a conference paper, a conference poster, a grant proposal. It will help you with a journal article. It will help you with those pieces, because as academics, we like to talk to other academics, and part of the way we connect is through those theoretical connections. And that makes you, as a community engaged scholar, more likely to be successful in your annual reviews and your promotion and tenure reviews, and stay at this university or another university and do amazing things. So part of why I've overemphasized this is because if you don't grasp this, you're gonna have a tougher time down the road, for sure. So let's move on from this, however. But let me just again reiterate, if you don't have foundational scholarship, if you've woken up on a Tuesday morning and you're just like, Halloween was fun last night, I'm just gonna throw together a project today and do a thing, and you're mostly gearing yourself up from your intuition, which is not a bad thing, it's gonna be hard down the road to call that scholarship. All right, let's talk about the thing we actually really more love to talk about. Let's talk about community. Because without community and community partners, we don't have community engaged scholarship. So we've got this pile of codified knowledge in our theory, and then we're tapping into the wisdom and experiences and perspectives of our partners. Super important second piece of this model. And I don't mean second as in like first is most important and second is second important, just I can't name them all simultaneously, so this is the second one I'm talking about. So what do we mean by community? Who are our community partners? And this is an important thing, I think, to step back and think about. This is another way our oak leaves do not look the same as each other's oak leaves. Community in the literature is defined in at least 7 different ways. As a community economic development person in a couple lifetimes ago, we talked a lot about geographic communities. We talked about neighborhoods, we talked about cities, we talked about regions. We were talking about geographies of communities. And some of you will be working with geography as a main component of your community. Many of you will not be. You might be working with communities of identity. This has to do with people, what they have in shared commonality is something to do with who they are. You may also be working with people who are forming those bonds with a group of people over an interest or an affiliation. This is something you have more of a choice about. Maybe you have an interest in history. Maybe you have an interest in a particular subject area. I do some work with our State Department of Natural Resources, and some of their main community partners are interest groups. Hunters, trappers, fishers, bird watchers, hikers, nature photography people. Like their main set of community partners are defined by that interest or affiliation, things people have a choice about doing. There are also communities around profession and practice. So if you're working with school teachers, that's a profession. If you're collaborating with people at a clinic, that's a profession. If you're collaborating with local government officials, that is a profession or practice. And then there's circumstances. This is defined as like hard circumstances. Did you notice that? Like, you know, you were in a fire, you were in a flood. What brought you together is you survived a terrible thing. Actually, other circumstances are nicer things. Like, you know, maybe you're the parents and all your kids are in the same soccer club and you hang out with those parents together and you form some loose bonds around the fact that your kids are doing something together and that has brought you together. Not necessarily because you're super interested in youth soccer, but like you're thrown together because you're the parents of the youth soccer kids. So that's also a circumstance. There are communities of faith and there are communities of kin or family that might be a community you partner with. And for a long time, that last one was like a little hard for me to figure out what that meant. And then I talked to one of the genetics researchers on our campus who did some breakthrough research on a specific type of inherited hearing loss that comes very early. And it turns out that north and west of campus is an area that has been settled a long time ago by a particular group of people who came over from Europe. And while they didn't intermarry, they kind of stuck in the broader farming community. And they have the inherited gene. And so she talked to the elders in the family who gave permission, who talked it up. And she had, I think, probably more than 30 family members said, yeah, we'll be part of your research project on genetic testing. And we'll tell you the story about like when we started to not be able to hear and what that was like. And through a long series of different types of tests, she was able to find the gene and figure out the specific gene that was leading to that particular form of inherited hearing loss. So her main community partner was this giant extended family. Like, okay, I would have thought maybe it was an anthropologist that was doing kinship work, but I think our genetics researchers that might be the appropriate community partner given the question. And so I want to let you think for a minute as you think about who you've partnered with in the past, who maybe are your current partners, who might be partners that you're looking for in the future. I bet they're in more than one category. So let me show you the next slide. Many of our community engagement folks are working with people at the intersections of different ways community is defined. So for example, if you were looking at patients at a health screening clinic in an urban refugee center, you've got geography and circumstance and identity, I would say. If you're looking at female African-American food entrepreneurs, you've got identity and profession and practice going on there. If you're looking at Hispanic fishers in inland lakes that have harmful algal blooms, part of my project, you've got identity and interest and circumstance there. So many of us who do community engagement work at the overlaps for our communities. So it's a thing to think about if you're pursuing scholarship related to the population, because you might have a complicated population. Kimberly Crenshaw talks to us about the intersectionality of people with marginalized communities, that they have different sets of issues they're thinking about, that they're not only female, but they're female and African American and a business person. And how does that combination of identities make things different than people who have not marginalized identities? So a thing to think about in your community engagement. So I'd like us to pause for a second, I believe.
Yes. And to think about partners you have worked with before, or you might think about working with in the future, and if there are any intersections. So I'm going to go back to this slide because that's helpful to answer that question. Would anyone like to volunteer a community group or partner, generally speaking, that they have worked with before? So I told you that I've worked with inland fishers who are of Hispanic descent, who are concerned about harmful algal blooms in the water where they're fishing, right? Who else has an example of someone they've collaborated with before? And yes.
So it's been several years ago, but we partnered with Parkway Elementary.
So you partnered with Parkway Elementary. Was it the school teachers or the principals or the kiddos?
The kids.
Kids,
that
okay.
were, at risk for being overweight, or obese.
Okay. So we have an identity, they're kids at this particular school, and a circumstance. Yeah, all right, thank you. Who else has an example they'd like to share?
True, the undergraduate research people group, and me, and then we're partnering to do creative activity research with Parks and Rec of Lubbock, specifically the cemetery, to do cemetery tours based on historical accuracy.
Okay, so we've got our undergraduate research group on campus, and we've got Lubbock Parks and Rec, and we are working on people who are interested in local history tours at cemeteries.
Yes.
Did I miss a group in there? I feel like I missed like one element. Maybe
There's
not.
undergrads and grad students as well.
Okay, undergrads and grad students. So how we would say, so City of Lubbock would be a profession of practice, like the Parks and Recs department.
Right.
And then people who are interested in the history of cemeteries might be an interest or affiliation?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That is the first time I've ever done a workshop where an interest or affiliation has been people who are interested in the history of cemeteries. Good job.
And then setting
Oh.
performances for the public as well.
And performances for the public. So then it would be the public who might be interested in participating in a performance. Okay, we got layers there. Who else has layers or some examples from something they're doing? Thank you for that, both of you. How about one more?
I can share one over here. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you great.
All
And say
right.
your name.
My name is John Sarturi, and I'm with Food Sciences. And I'll mention two that I've been working with, but a third one that I would like to add, maybe that might be your next step over there. So sorry about if I'm changing what you asked. But so the undergrad, so senior students, we work with ranchers, and they have the ability to bring those ranchers that they know or within the community that I know when the groups cannot come up with a partner. And want to involve as well Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, which is our extension agencies here that deal with this as well. So we have a couple of agencies around our area.
Fantastic. I like the complicated layers there. And ranchers as, I guess I would say, a profession in practice, probably. Also, yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Valerie says Dallas College and Trinity River Audubon Center.
Oh, so Valerie says Dallas College and Trinity Area Audubon Center. Yep. Right. I hope you're getting the sense that which communities you collaborate with can be a very wide combination of communities. So when you're talking about your work or writing about your work and you say, my community partners and I did X, it's really helpful to say who the community partners are, if they have complicated layered identities. It's really helpful to make a partnership map or diagram because you have different partners doing different things in different ways, I would think. That food science one, I imagine, would be a really interesting diagram or map. We've got these people contributing this way and these people contributing that way, and we're pulling in expertise from here. Visually show us the moving parts of your partnerships. Rarely do we have community partners where it's you and one group. Very often it's you and one group and the group they serve. And sometimes it's you and the group they serve and then another, like, you know, it kind of spreads out a little bit. So thank you for that. We are right about here. So let me say a couple more things about community partners, and then I think we should take a little mini break. Stand up, walk around, stretch a little bit, get some food. So as you're listening to your community partners, so it's, you know, obviously you have them, but part of why you're partnering with them is to hear their experience and wisdom. So what you're listening for as you have that partnership is listening for both explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. What are things they can tell you? Because you could say, hey, I have a question, tell me about this, and they will tell you this, this, and this. But there are things that they might know that they don't even know that they know to tell you about. Oh. Well, we'll just keep talking about that for a second. It almost looks like something came loose.
I know, it's like.
Okay, so explicit and tacit knowledge. So I like to think about this as things we know, we could say out loud that we know, and then things that we know because we've done them or experienced them, that they're somehow like deep in our heads or our hands or our hearts, and we don't actually know how to like off the top of our head say something. So you heard me say this example yesterday, but I like to think about it a lot. When I was 14, my parents divorced, and I went to my grandmother and I said, Grandmother, teach me how to make Thanksgiving dinner. I would like to know how to make Thanksgiving dinner for the family. Oh, look. And so I have this gorgeous, perfect 14-year-old handwriting. You can read it. I must have gotten a penmanship award at one point. I can't do that now. Oh. So I have all the steps. And I cannot make Thanksgiving dinner taste like my grandmother's. I think when she told me the steps, she missed some things. And it wasn't because she was being mean or she didn't want to tell me. I think there were things she just knew to do in the process of doing it that she just did. And she didn't unconsciously notice, so Diane, then you do this. Or Diane, then you do that. Like I missed some steps because I was 14 and I didn't think to ask enough questions to kind of draw out not the things that she knew on the top of her head, but the things that she knew from the doing of it every day that she didn't even know she knew. So I think about that a lot. So that is one form of knowledge that you're going to want to ask about and listen for. And by ask about, I don't mean, please tell me your tacit knowledge. That's a little ridiculous. I know you wouldn't do that. But you ask about it by having conversations, spending time, listening more deeply, but paying attention to that because you want to hear about that. Another type of knowledge you want to hear about is local knowledge. Now, this is really important if you are focused on a geographic area, but it's also important like for local practice. Your partners know things, and they know things by the doing of those things. They know things by the observing of things. So one of my favorite examples about that is where I live at home. For the first several years, we had a farm field across the street from me. It had beans or wheat or corn, depending on which year it was. So then that piece of property was sold. Broke my heart. I couldn't buy 40 acres of land, let me tell you. No. So they put 5 houses on it. Okay, it could have been worse. But I know at the 4-way stop sign in front of my house, that piece of property in the corner floods every spring. It doesn't flood a little bit. It's like the whole half of this room is underwater, at least up to your knees. Ducks come and live on it for a while. It could be there for a couple of months. It's not just wet. It's like a small pond. Everybody who would come to that 4-way stop sign and stop would know that because you could see it. And there might be a duck landing or you could hear frogs in it, you know? I mean, it was like pretty obvious that was a really big wet spot. So do you think the people who bought that property had any local knowledge they tapped into? Do you think the builder came and said, hey, what do you know about this piece of land? I'm getting ready to put a house on it. You know where they put the driveway, right? Through the wet part. And so it's not just wet in the springtime when it floods out and is splashy, But it's also wet in the wintertime when we have these thaws, then that pondy part ices over and a whole chunk of their driveway is just iced over. So this, if you had asked local knowledge, I would have said to you, I think it'd be really important for you not to do your driveway there. You have 5 acres, just move it that way. No one asked me. No one asked me. And so that driveway is never going to be okay, ever. Because I knew things because I lived there and observed things. Your partners live places and observe things and know about how things happen, and they don't know to say just straight out, hey, by the way, but you can listen and ask and think about that. There is also indigenous knowledge that you might be thinking about. You might be partnering with people who are from a particular place. They might be Native Americans, they might be other indigenous people. I would highly suggest, if those are your community partners, to get some additional training on how to be culturally respectful and to think about entirely different mindsets and ways of thinking that are part of those partners' perspectives, so that as you're listening to their wisdom and experience, your particular mindset isn't missing things. So back a few slides, when I had kin as one of our types of community, I had somebody in a workshop once say to me, the group that I am part of, when we think of kin, that word does not mean people only. The Native American tribe I am a part of, that also means the plants, the animals, the air, the water, and the soil. When we think about kin, that word has a very different meaning than when you think about kin. And I went, I bet it does. And when you looked at my definition, it didn't say any of those things because I had a Western definition. We have a ghost in the machine today, don't we?
It's a loose HDMI cable.
Have you done a good wiggle?
I've tried. Well, I'm gonna stay right here
Oh, goodness. So here's another kind of knowledge to listen for. And actually, good catch on figuring that out.
I was like, it's something.
Okay. There's practitioner knowledge. This is a favorite type of knowledge from my perspective. And as you think about your community partners, think about what they know from the doing of things. If our rancher folks, your community partners, know a whole lot from being a successful rancher. Farmers know a lot. School teachers know a lot. People in clinics know a lot. People who do things know a lot. They know a lot in their hands. They know if something feels right or wrong. They know it from looking. Something is not right with that animal out in that field. I better go out and check them. I would talk to my mom about when we were little. She's like, Diane, I always knew when you were sick about 3 days before the doctor could tell. And if I took you on the first day that you were sick, because I'm your mom and I knew you weren't right, the doctor would look at you and say, oh, you're fine. And 3 days later, we'd be back and you wouldn't be fine, because I could see it in you before someone else could see it in you. People know things from the doing of what they do. Asking, respecting, drawing that out is a really important thing as a community engaged scholar. They know all sorts of stuff from the doing of things. Some of your community partners will think, because you are from the university, that you know everything, and that they are going to downplay what they know in deference to what you know. There is a power difference. You might not like that, but it's there. And the extent to which you can acknowledge that, but then work to elevate your partner's knowledge, listen deeply, say, I really do want to know about how that works. I really do want to know about, when you looked out in that field and you saw something different, what were you seeing? Talk to me about that. Tell me a little bit more. I'm really curious. You know some things I don't know. I'd love to hear them. Draw that extra knowledge out. Because as you're partnering with your community partners, this knowledge is really important to have to mix with that foundational scholarship to then inform your work together. It's a way of showing respect, of course, to your community partners. It's also a way of making the work better. They really do know things we don't know. And part of why we're partnering with them is to bring that knowledge into the process. So, gentle walking.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Can you give an example of how to draw on that knowledge? Do you have any experience or an example? Because it sounds to me like you wouldn't be able to identify necessarily what your grandmother wasn't telling you.
I still don't know what my grandmother wasn't telling me. Honestly, I still don't know. You're right, I don't know. I can give you an example. So previously, in one of my previous academic lives, I coordinated and co-led a service learning study abroad program in the rural west of Ireland. It was a community engagement program. We picked County Mayo because it is the least populated county, but geographically the biggest county, so very rural, and it's the most forgotten about county. If you get a guidebook, Go Ireland, County Mayo is not even in the index. And if you land at the airport and you talk to the passport control person, oh, where are you going on holiday? County Mayo, they will pause and look at you and go, why are you gonna go talk to those bog people? Like there is a stigma against this part of Ireland. And so we were working in that part of Ireland on purpose. Also, absolutely stunning and beautiful. And I understand the movie that has just come out called The Banshees of Inisherin. I got that wrong. Inisherin. Was all filmed in County Mayo. Oh, wow. I'm like, I have to go in the theater to see where I used to work for 10 years in the big, beautiful screen. So the way the project worked is I had a student in a village, 200, 500 people. They had applied to be part of the program. There was a mentor team and a host family. There was a project. My community partner was rallying communities to say, here's what we would like. I'm rallying students on campus who wants to kind of go do a thing. We did a matchmaking kind of piece. And then our students kind of like in a Peace Corps style got dropped off in various communities, and my job was to run around and check on them and go to community partner meetings. I'm saying all of this because I did not live in County Mayo, Ireland, for as much as I would still really love to do that. We relied on resource people. And so one of our projects had to do with a parks project and an interpretation project, and there were cemeteries involved. So I have had cemetery projects. I just don't hear people here say that. And so I was meeting with a resource person. So the network team said, your student, Maddie, should go talk to this person. And I said, okay, great. Really helpful that Kevin Kniff is willing to meet with my student. Kevin knows a ton about the parks. He knows a ton about the local area. I'm thinking this guy, he obviously knows more than I do. So we set up the meeting and I meet them in this church parking lot, and Kevin is there and I bring the student because the students aren't allowed to drive because you can't drive unless you're 25 in Ireland. So I'm doing all the driving, which is smart. And then this other lady comes by that I know. And she just kind of rolls down the window and said, hey, how's it going? And I think, oh, it's kind of nice. Patricia Finnerty was coming by, just came and said hi. I come to find out later that Patricia Finnerty did not just happen by, that Kevin Kniff was really worried about meeting with that lady from the university and really worried about meeting with the student because the student was from the university. Kevin Kniff had not finished school, hadn't finished high school. And he was really almost frightened to talk to us because what could he possibly know to tell us? And so he talked to Patricia Finnerty and said, come by, if I look like I'm having trouble, would you stop and help me with this meeting? I had no idea that the power difference was so hard for him to imagine that he would have any bit of knowledge that would be useful to our thing. And here am I thinking, I have zero knowledge that's useful, and he has 100% of the knowledge. And he's walking in thinking he has 0%, because we would have 100% because we're from the university, right? And so I didn't know this for weeks, actually. And then Patricia Finner said, you know, that meeting, so I remember that meeting. I thought it was so nice that I didn't just have it. Oh, no. And so what happened was a series of walks where Kevin Kniff would take the student out. They would walk different places. He would tell her different things. He would tell her different stories. She would ask him more questions. They would go for more walks. He would tell her different stories. She would ask more questions. And the local knowledge kind of bubbled out of him on these very informal walks. They weren't interviews. She didn't sit down with a list of questions. They weren't at the library where they were outside, walking around, driving around, and he was telling her the stories of the things that he knew. And all of those came together to be what was really important. When we got close to the end of the program, at the end of the 6 weeks, Kevin did finally say to me, Diana, I was really nervous meeting you. And I acted like I didn't know. And I said, well, I hope you don't feel nervous now. You really helped that project out. We could have never done that project without you. He says, yeah, I guess I realize that now. So I think part of it is maybe time, conversation, listening some more. I don't know that you draw this out and like on our meeting agenda today will be local knowledge. Next week we will talk about, like, I don't think it's like comes out like that. I think it comes out in careful listening and in intentionally saying, you know some things we really don't know. And like holding up and holding space for their experiences to be conceived of as really helpful and really thoughtful. So that is a very long story to say that I think you have to spend some time listening, doing maybe some unconventional things. I don't think anywhere, unlike our student thing, is one of your tasks as a student will be to go on walks and listen to old people, but actually go on walks and listen to old people is really great. Go on walks and listen to young people is really great too. I would say if your host family had a 5 or 6 year old and you got permission, have the kid walk you through the village and tell you what the kid knows about the village. You learn so much by listening. So yeah.
What was going through my mind as you were saying that story, Diane, was the fact it's in their comfort zone.
Yes.
Where they are, and that opens them up, and then the listening that you were talking about. And I think that goes with kids, that goes with seniors, that goes with everyone. And we have a tendency in higher education to meet me in my office.
Yes.
And that's the wrong place.
Yes. It's also, and that's an excellent point, because people will tell you different things in different physical places if you can be physically with them. I did some research work with startup CEOs in the local Lansing area. We do have a handful of them. And I would get set up with the PR person and the CEO in the conference room, beautiful conference rooms, big shiny tables. We would sit there and I would get my tape recorder out. We'd have all the questions. And then someone would say, well, would you like to see the floor? Would you like to see the manufacturing floor? Would you like to see the server room? Would you like us to give you a tour? Oh, yes, I would. And we would go for a walk and they would tell me absolutely totally different things than they said in the fancy conference room where we were all formal talking to each other people. They'd point to this and they'd tell me the story of that and put my hard hat on and I'd walk like this. I'm supposed to walk the yellow line, not be over there in the green area. And I followed all the rules and I heard so many different things when I was not in the conference room. Yeah. And I saw interesting things, and I would have not known those things if we had stayed in the conference room. So move around if you can. But thank you for asking that question. Well, I think we can get started here. I have a few more practical things to start sharing with you. We've talked about a lot of big, heady things this morning already, which is great. But I feel like as a community engaged scholar myself, it is more helpful to have practical tools to think about, like, so if I roll up my sleeves, what do I do? So I wanted to kind of switch for the rest of the morning and think about what some of those tools are. One of the things I think is important to talk about is when we're inviting our community partners in, how we think about their knowledge. And I have some tools that go with this. So every profession has some inherent biases. We have some personal biases we have grown up with and inherited, and we are probably all in the process of unpacking and examining and understanding them. But even as a profession, you may have places that you were taught to focus on, which means there were places you were taught not to focus on. So as a community economic development person, we had in our upbringing as a professional, things that happen, right? So like there's certain places, if I come into a community, I am shown, and there are places that I am not shown. I get to see the spiffy redevelopment, and no one ever takes me to the homeless camp, right? That happens. And so being aware of that and thinking about like, well, how to ask, can I see some other places? There are people that you will be introduced to as community partners, and there will be people that your community partners might not introduce you to. You don't get immediately introduced to the troublemakers, for example. They accidentally set the meeting at times when that person can't come, because we know they're busy. There are seasonal things. This is definitely a big issue in Michigan. We have two parts to our state. We have the lower part that looks like your hand, and then the upper part. Just some funny things, that is called Upper Peninsula, or UP. People who live there are called Upers. And those of us who live down in this part of the hand, because we live under the bridge that connects the two, the Upers call us trolls after that 3 billy goats grew up from the people who lived under the bridge, not internet trolls. So I'm saying this because at Michigan State University, we do work that serves our state, but we do much less work in the UP in the wintertime, when it's feet of snow that last, and people have second-story doors that open over the snow. We don't go up there. You can't get up there, so we don't go. When I did work in East Africa, there is the rainy season and the dry season. And during the rainy season, you don't go places. Now, there are people there, they have issues, they could use our help, or we could use listening to their experience, but we don't, because it's muddy or wet or washed out or snowy. There are other biases that come with this. People who are being polite because you are the guest in their community, and they don't always say all the things that need to be said right away. And there are things that you are brought up to focus on that may not be the things that need to be focused on. And then there are also security issues that come with working in certain areas. I had mentioned working with the state government agency and our wildlife division. They're at an interesting crossroads because of their professional upbringing. They have been brought up to think about people who hunt and fish and trap. The proportion of people in Michigan who do that as a pastime, tanking. The proportion of people who want to do outdoorsy stuff on state land that have nothing to do with eating wildlife, going through the roof. They didn't have any classes on non-hunters, non-fishers, and non-trappers. They're in a moment in their profession where their professional upbringing has caused them to focus one place, and the world around them is changing in a different way, and they kind of have these big blind spots. How do you talk the Audubon Society, who wants to actually look at the cool birds, but are not waterfowl hunters who want to eat the cool birds, right? And so they are at a spot where they're trying to retrain because they haven't had it. I would offer to all of you that your professions have given you great insight in some things, and of course have given you less insight on other things, and to think about where those biases show up. So there are some tools to think about this. These are each worksheets in your Google folder. This one is from Brown and Lambert. What I like about it is that it says different groups of people believe sources of truth come from different places and discount knowledge or sources of truth that come from other places. So if you're working in a very technical, specialized field, you might be valuing measurement, observation, but you might be working with people who that's not so exciting, and all they think you are thinking about is jargon, that you are thinking about narrow, irrelevant things because you have all these little bits of data. They don't value that. So as a community engaged scholar, you may on your own be struggling with how to talk across different groups. But as you pull your community together, these different people are in the room, and you need to set the table so they can listen to each other as well. I know, a big thing. So there is a worksheet to help you with that. I love this, because this helps you think about who should be involved in your project. And it is a very simple and deceiving little rainbow diagram. A lot of people, as they think about pulling together partners for their projects, focus over here. Who are the people who are affected by the issue? This might be more of a community organizing, a grassroots, a bottom-up approach. If these folks are having the issue, let's write them in and let's work together to understand their perspective and move forward. There is another way to think about that. And that has to do with thinking about who is in a position of power to effect change. Who are the political leaders? Who are the financial leaders? Who are the people, formally or informally, that can make a difference in making the change happen? This is sometimes thought of as a top-down approach. A lot of community development happens this way, by the way. The sweet spot for effective community engagement is the pie shape in the middle. How can you bring the people affected by the problem together with the people in the powerful position to make changes about that problem and have them talk to each other and have them talk to you? You can use this with your community partners to brainstorm people on both sides. It's a tool that you can pull out and say, hey, let's talk about this. Of course, not on your first meeting, but you can get there and talk about it. I am firmly aware of the fact that some of these people may not actually want to be in the room with those people. There may be some bad feelings. If that is the case, talk to these people, talk to those people, talk to these people, talk to those people, share what you're hearing this way, share what you're hearing that way, and slowly wear them down so they might understand one another's perspectives and can maybe be in the room together. But this is a powerful way of thinking about who is not in my process, who is not on my partnership map, who else might I consider including? And talk to your partners because they know people you don't know. So here's a tool that will help. Another tool that will help is this one. This is the easy to hard to include in my community engagement process continuum. And let me just jump ahead for a second. I also made you a worksheet for this. Okay. So, from the book of Kitchen Table Sustainability comes this picture where it talks about when you say, hey, who wants to be part of my process? You have people who volunteer and say they're going to come. These are the most likely people to show up. They either have a commitment, they like showing up, they like you, they like your partner organization. These are the people you know you've got. But every step on the continuum turns out to be people who are a little more difficult to pull into the process. So for example, depending on where you are, there might be people who are geographically isolated. They can't make the drive, gas is too expensive. You might have working parents. We don't have childcare on site. They can't come because they can't afford it. You start to think about people who are mad, people who showed up at the community meeting before and got ignored, and I'm not coming to another one of those meetings. That was a waste of my time. They still might have really important knowledge. They still might have really important things to share with you. So think about what might be done to help them. There are people that may not feel this process is for them. Language might be an issue. You might have picked a venue they physically can't get in and out of. That is a problem. What is really exciting about this is this last piece here was actually supposed to be another column, but I couldn't make it go on the slide. As you start to move across, we start to take into consideration perspectives that are not necessarily focused on people. And depending on who your partners are, that column can be very important. I was talking yesterday to somebody who talked about traditional ecological knowledge and the legal overlap with, in some places, who and what has standing legally. And sometimes it's more than people. My point with this is, in any given community engagement project, as you think about who your partners are, they're going to be easy people to have show up. And they're going to be people who are more reluctant, less likely, but they're still really important to have. Sit with your partners, talk with them, think about who they are specifically, and then with your partners or with some of those folks, think about what would make it easier for them to be part of your process. How could we make that work? How can we make it inviting? How can we invite those perspectives in? I know that you can't do everything for everyone, but some intentionality and some purposeful thinking about it might be able to broaden it just a little bit more. And it may be that it's not you that does the extra inviting. Maybe it's your community partner that does the extra inviting because they're more trusted than you are. But think very creatively about who is not at the table and who should be, and use some tools to help you focus in on that so that as you're listening, you aren't having unintentional biases in who you're listening to and who you're not listening to. So let me just pause and ask a question. Does anybody have an example of a way in which they have just been super thoughtful about who is at the table and who isn't, how they've tried to draw some people in? Sometimes folks have a really cool example of that, and I would love to hear it. Sometimes people don't, that's okay. Any examples? Do we have anything in the chat? Someone said, oh, here's my burning example. I am not surprised. This is a hard thing to think about. But you have some tools to use with your partners. So we talked a little bit about this purple diagram, which you know I like so much. The third part of this diagram, right, is that you're doing stuff with your partners, and then something is coming out of that. You have academic pieces, and you have pieces that serve the public, your partners and practitioners. And so let's talk a smidgen about that too. It is useful at the beginning of a project to talk to your partners about what might be helpful to you to have as part of this. It's also helpful to hear from them what might be useful from their perspective. More often than not, I know that community engaged scholars are very reluctant to say, I'm going to need a grant report out of this. I'm going to need a conference presentation out of this. I'm going to need a journal article out of this. Very often, community engaged scholars hold that in deference to what the community partners need. They say, what do you need? What can we do? What is helpful to you? And they really emphasize that, which you should do, but they hold their stuff back. So that's natural, I think, because you're trying to give a lot of space to your community partners. But it also means in holding it back, your partners actually don't understand what you need. You haven't really explained and shared yourself. And so by not having that conversation soonish, you lose some opportunities to do some creative things, and you use some opportunities for trust building. At the end of the process, oh yeah, we need a journal article. I'm really gonna pop that out at the end. That seems a little bait and switchy a little bit. So think very intentionally about the figure-8 relationship between what are those academic pieces and those public pieces, and how can they go together, and how might you be generating things that are useful for both of you. So here is a list of some academic pieces. We're very well familiar with these. We've got curriculum, we've got journal articles and conference posters and grant proposals. We have exhibitions and we have shows and we have curated pieces for our creative activities folks. And in the academy, we peer review lots of stuff, right? I have been asked for a long example list of the public products. And I can tell you there is no list. This is a partial list. There is no list. Anything that is useful, that is generated from your scholarship and your collaboration can be on this list. So it could be a report, it could be a briefing, it could be a decision tool, it could be a podcast, it could be a collaborative performance or newspaper article or anything. And with our new and social media, the doors are just wide open to what would be useful for your community partners. Please remember to put them on your CV. They are scholarly products that are coming from a scholarly collaboration. It's just that the audience is a different audience. So consider that. That is my pretty thing. Any questions or comments about academic and public products? Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, sometimes it is kind of like overwhelming to kind of try to approach community partners because there are so many other people trying to approach them. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And so, like, you know, for example, here in Lubbock, there is a particular communities where the researchers are putting their focus on. And so it is really hard to try to know. So it's kind of like being kind of like how can you approach a community partner when they are overwhelmed? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. We also have that problem in particular neighborhoods near the campus of Michigan State. We have a couple of neighborhood organizations that are really strong. They've got great leadership. They're super organized. They get asked all the time to be community partners. And it wears them out because their main job is not to be community partners. Their main job is to do the thing their main job is to do. And so I think sometimes it's thinking about who else might be partners, who are people who might not be as well organized, but might be forgotten organizations. Are there other ways to find partners who might be doing similar things, but just don't have the notoriety, right? You know, are there faith-based groups, or are there other groups that you might collaborate with on the same kinds of questions that are not the over-asked groups? So that's one way. The other way to think about things is every nonprofit organization, every business I know, every public agency I know, if you sat down with the leader and said, what are some things, if only you had enough money, enough people, enough time, you would really like someone to focus on? Everybody has the wish list. You actually have the wish list too. If you had enough extra, here is where you would like some focus put. They might not be able to answer that in the first conversation. You might say, go away and think about that. If you're responding to something that's their priority, from their perspective, it feels like less of a burden. You're helping them with a thing they couldn't get to themselves, than if you're responding from something that's your top priority and asking them to do it. So that's another way to think about it. And it may be that that whole collection of researchers that's focusing on that one group, no one has sat down and said, okay, so all that's going on, that's great. What else would you really like? Can I find a way to help you with the thing that you would really like? And that changes that burdensome feeling. So those are a couple suggestions. I think it's really great that you're aware of that. That absolutely happens in neighborhoods adjacent to big Research One universities, and it happens unevenly. So in Lansing, there's some neighborhoods that are overtapped, and there's some neighborhoods that are ignored. So again, I think when people come talk to me, I'm like, have you thought about the ignored neighborhood? Have you thought about the ignored group of people? They might not be as used to collaborating with university people, but they still might have needs, and there may be really interesting things to discover with them. Yeah, good question. So, yeah, let me go back. I always like that dog. I think our words fail us. I think it's very hard when we talk about community engagement, when we say we partnered together, we collaborated, we worked together on a project, for anyone to actually know what we mean by that. Like, okay, so then who did what, when, and how? How did that work? Our words just are not clear enough. And so I find very often when you're saying, I partnered with my partners and I did this, like, but what did you do? How did that work? If any of you have had a dog, you get that questioning head turn, like, what? What are you telling me? I don't understand. And I feel like that happens a lot to me in community engagement, at least. Turn my head, I'm like, tell me more details about what you were doing. So with that, I wanted to help introduce a tool, because remember the second half is about tools, that is the abacus tool. And I will hold this up, people on Zoom. I actually brought an abacus in my suitcase from East Lansing. And I know the TSA checker guys were like, what does that lady have in her suitcase? An abacus. For those of you who ever used an abacus to actually count things, we are not counting. We are accounting for with this tool. So for people who are more literal about abacuses, you will be disappointed. I'm not actually going to count items. But we are going to use this as a visual tool for helping talk about who did what when in a collaboration. My colleague Sherry Dan and I came up with this to help in our teaching, and it also helps in our research as well. So let me explain to you how the abacus works. I will also say in your Google Drive, you have the article that explains this. So yes, you can write an article about a community engagement tool. And then you have some worksheets that go with it. So let me share how this works. So if you were to imagine one side of the abacus being the community partner and one side of the abacus being the university. I know, hold the question, you have more than one community partner, we'll get there. But you've got two sides to the partnership. Let us also imagine that the rungs, these nice metal parts, they represent the steps in your process. So if you were in a research collaboration, your research steps would have different names than if you were co-creating, let's say, a community opera, different steps. Your teaching and learning would have different steps. So for each of you, you would name the rungs for the steps in your process. Okay? I can tell I have not lost anyone yet. And so I have some examples. They're in the article and in your Google Drive. Here are steps and rung names for research. And they're very familiar to you, right? Here is one for credit teaching, so your service learning class. Here are some additional steps for teaching and learning that does not have credit. So you're going to go out to your center and you're going to learn stuff on an afternoon as a school field trip. Not for credit, but you're still going to learn good things. Here is a community engaged service and practice one. This one's starting to get really iffy because the steps in service and practice vary from everybody's. We just made some good guesses here. You should definitely rename the rungs if you're doing this. Okay. The beads represent who has a say, who has more of a voice, and who has less of a voice. And you move the beads to say, and to show that. So, you're smart people. This is the university side. If all of the beads are on this side of the abacus, is that community engaged? Your community partner had no say in anything. This is you doing research on a community or using a community as a site for teaching, but you are not collaborating. Please do not call this project community engaged research. Okay, but let's say the community came up with, I need your assistance with this. And you said, well, let's talk about it. You go back and forth and you come up with a plan. And let's say they're in charge of these steps and you're in charge of those steps. And this step you split 50-50. And this step you split 50-50. And then that they took care of, and then this you took care of. All of a sudden, if I say we partnered, and then I said, I took the lead on step 2, yellow step, blue step, yellow step. They took the lead on blue step, white step, green step, green step. And we split responsibility for these 2 steps. It's much clearer about what happened and who did which thing when. All of a sudden, the dog does not turn his head sideways. It goes, oh, okay, I get it. This is what that partnership looked like. The reason why having something like this, whether it's the abacus tool or not, is so important is it helps at different parts of the conversation. I had a conversation with a community partner once. I had done a lot of teaching and learning with them. I thought, here's a really cool research thing we might work together. And I said, would you like to do a research project with me? I think there's something neat we could do. What do you think? And they said, yes. And then a couple meetings later, I realized they had no idea what they just said yes to. They had never been part of a research project, and they had no idea what the steps were. They had no idea what those rungs would even be. So backing up, I said, okay, well, let's talk some more about what that looks like. And now I realize that that's unfamiliar. Let's talk about what the steps could be. This is helpful in putting together agreements, who is going to do which things when. It is helpful in grant writing. We're collaborating. Let me explain which parts I am doing and which parts my partner is responsible for. It is also really helpful as a midpoint check-in. So we said we were going to divide up responsibilities this way. Do we still want to keep doing it that way, or do you want to make some adjustments? It is really good at the end to say, here's how the beads split out in reality. This does not match our first abacus, and here is why, for good reason. And it's good for teaching and learning, which is where this tool really originally came from. my colleague and I were talking to students about collaborating and listening to partners, and it was really unclear at what moments in the process do we listen to our partners. Just was like, okay, I'm listening, but when and how? And so we really tried to break the steps down to different listening points to kind of see where decision-making could be shifted. So this is a tool that might be useful in helping you unpack when to do that. You may also use it in a journal article. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Caveats. You have more than one partner, right? So how do you represent that? Well, you represent that by using a graduated bar chart, using different colored beads per each step. And the more of the color is the more of the say, and the less of the color is less of the say. So if you look at these three, step 3, the red group had less of a say in that first step, but allowed an equal amount in the same 2 steps, 2 and 3. In step 3, the blue group had less of a say. So you can modify it, of course. You can also modify it if you're using a very iterative process. You know, we go through this first loop of work together, then that defines our second loop. We go through a second loop together, that defines our third loop. You just add more rungs. And on the side, you label them cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3. Just modify it. Make it your tool, which is that invitation that we have for you. Thoughts or questions about using a tool to unpack the process and show community partner voice? Maybe you could do that? Seeming okay? Seeming really weird? How are people feeling about this?
It's a good idea.
I can tell you, as long as you have enough hand sanitizer, that people actually like touching the beads and moving them and saying, no, 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 I think that's more of you. No, no, no. Like, there's something tactile, there's something visual, there's something really different about moving beads and portraying this in a conversation, depending on who your partners are, than like, let's sit down at the conference table and have a discussion and hash this out. This feels different.
So you definitely take that to your meetings.
Well, after I've like figured out that the community partner will not think I'm a total weirdo. Like, I don't show up at my first meeting like, hi, I haven't really met you before. Brought my abacus. I think that would be a little weird. And you know, community engagement's a little weird anyhow. So like, you know, you gotta know someone well. I have, however, with a lot of trust, a little ways in with someone I've done some projects with, I have brought my abacus with me. I have used that. I have community engaged scholar friends on campus that they have one of these on their desk. I mean, this is a really nice one. It's like $12 on Amazon. It's not an expensive one. And I think I got this at a local toy store to help the local economy. Change the rung names. Change how many rungs you have. Use the worksheets, don't use the worksheets, but think about a way of breaking the steps down and having the conversation about who is going to help make decisions with which things. There's some things you're probably going to have to make decisions on. These might be in your court for some things. I did a project, actually it's probably the next thing on here. Let's see, did I include that example? I did. Let me tell you about this project. And physics person, I hope you're still there, because I think you're gonna love this project maybe. So I had the opportunity to work with the Liz Lerman Dance Exchange, who's a MacArthur award-winning fellow in the Baltimore area, who is a choreographer. And Liz Lerman, who is the choreographer, choreographed a piece called The Matter of Origins. This had to do with understanding where we come from as a people. And it was very provocative and very exciting. Part of how some people believe we came into existence was through the Big Bang. So there's a lot of physics in this. Part of how people believe we came to be is through a more religiously based origin story. All of those pieces were in this 2-part dance performance. So let me just give you a little bit, we were gonna get the abacus in a second. So Well, yeah, so this is a photograph from the performance. My community partners were the Liz Lerman Dance Exchange. This was a multimedia, community engaged dance performance. There was Act 1 in a theater, so you'd all be in the seats and there'd be dancers up here. And then Act 2 was totally different. You went into another room and everybody sat at preset tea tables and the dancers danced among the tables. And at the tea tables, you had a physicist who was known as a provocateur who provoked conversation at the tea table. And the second act had different phases of the second act. What was great about this was that it was a 2-year project. Sometimes we worked a lot together and sometimes we weren't working that much together. We had a small team of regular partners. And then at the 5 places around the country this was performed, we actually had local partners. So set partners and then varying partners. And the concepts behind it, the foundational scholarship, had to do with art, science, and dance and physics. And it was designed to provoke thought and wonder about the nature of our origins. It was a community engaged research and evaluation project about a community engaged creative activity. Notice we got some overlap going on. And we looked at social issues like the public understanding of science. We looked at informal science education. We looked at aesthetic engagement and kinesthetic engagement. The National Science Foundation that funded this was interested in, could performances like this help traditionally underrepresented groups in the sciences understand science more? And I've got to tell you that I thought the answer would be no. Can you really go to a 2-hour performance and come away knowing physics stuff? Some stuff? I was wrong. I was wrong. So here is some of the foundational scholarship that Liz Lerman brought into the project, and we also brought into the project. And you can see the multimedia part of this. You see Madame Curie there in the back with the little yellow beaker, right? You see equations behind our dancers. We were looking at quantum physics and the art-science relationship. We were looking at learning through movement and reflection and dialogue. That second act was dialogue. And we were looking at, someone asked this earlier, alternative evaluation methods and assessment. Because this was like a tricky thing to give NSF some numbers. Our partnership diagram, and I've mentioned these, was a little messy. So we had the Dance Exchange who wrote the grant and the program officer in the Eager Grant programming area. We had my team, which included me, a statistician, and a sociology student. We also had an advisory committee to help my team, because I know you have already figured out that I am both not a physicist and also not a dancer. You knew that. I can hold up an abacus, but I'm not going to dance super well. And Liz Lerman would be upset that I said that, because everyone can dance. And then we had those 5 sites where we had a performing arts center director. We had local dancers that we would come to town and train the local dancers, and then the local dancers would also be part of the performance. So complicated, so many moving parts. Our abacus looked like this. This is why I bring this up at this moment. The community partner started it all off. They wrote the grant. The second step when we decided on the research process, this took about 10 months. We suggested something, they said no. They said, what about this? We said, that's not rigorous enough for NSF. We said, well, what about this other thing? They said, we don't want you to put clickers in the auditorium, that will ruin the performance. I said, but we need to have some data. We went back and forth for 10 months and it was really hard. I also learned some other things about dance. I thought there might be like a, you know, like in a play, there's actually a script behind the scenes where they're like instructions and then this happened and you enter stage left. I kind of thought with the dance there would be some kind of like libretto or something. Absolutely not. No. So like in this first set of movements, what did that mean in terms of physics? Yes, was the answer. So we worked on it really hard and we really came up with some great stuff. So you can see that steps 3 and 4, that's really split. You can also see in step 5, they collected all of the data. And they put the lobby survey, they put the intermission survey, and they put the Act 3 tea table survey, where we actually rotated part of the tablecloth to look like part of the Large Hadron Collider. We lifted it up, and there was your survey. We got boxes of surveys sent to Michigan State University, and we entered them all. So they collected, and we did the data. And then together we talked about what were the meanings, what did we find, what was really important. We disseminated on the academic side, they disseminated on the public and art scene side. We always ran our pieces by them first. And if they needed data for anything they were doing, we always provided it like on a quick turnaround. Some of what came out of it were papers. I wrote a reflective paper about what it is like. It almost sounds like a joke. You know, like when a choreographer, a physicist, and a communicative scholar walk into a bar. I wrote a piece on like what it was like to bring those 3 totally different mindsets together in something where NSF wanted a rigorous evaluation. Because I had to write about that first, because that experience was so rich and complicated and confusing and frustrating and hard and wonderful that I wrote about that piece before we wrote up the data. Kind of had to get it out of my head. It was great. And the Dance Exchange read and reviewed and revised and changed some things. On their end, they did press releases and media interviews. Liz Lerman's really great at that. She has since moved on from the Dance Exchange. I will say that the Dance Exchange is performing at MSU this weekend. So I wanted to just show that, like, let me just go back through for a second. As you think about talking about your research, as you talk to people, it is a great idea to have a partnership diagram. Put one in your journal article, put one in your grant report, show the moving pieces. They do not have to have boxes. Make squiggly lines, make clusters of groups here and squiggly lines. You know, it may not have been as hierarchical as this looks. Yours certainly might not be. Talk about who did what when and how. Important. Think about what those academic scholarly products are. We actually, for the Imagining America Community Engagement Conference, bullet point 3, that was cool. Choreographed a new dance and had like the people in the conference session be part of a collaboratively choreographed dance around the themes at the conference. And I did dance part of that. I know, pretty edgy. Think about those public products that mean something to your partners. Okay. This is a teacher professional development example that I'm going to skip for now. It is in your slides, it is in the journal article. But this had to do with learning about the environment. Take pictures of your work with permission from your people. It helps. Okay, we're gonna skip. Just blink. And I'm gonna do it this way because that won't mess up our Zoom. But you can see that there were 2 layers of partnerships. Here's layer 1 in the beads, layer 2 in the beads, all of it together. Okay. Let me just pause and ask if there are questions about using an abacus or talking about your partnership. So I do want to talk a little bit about writing, which we all need to do. So any questions? Questions on our Zoom, people? Try the abacus maybe, see what happens. Give it a try.
So I just have a comment. So from these, from your examples, it seems like the process is something that is unknown, right? Like it's something that you have to figure out as you go with your relationship with the partner, and just get to know each other and try to figure things out. It's like an entire process.
It can be. And like with the Dance Exchange, we were 3 sets of partners who had never worked before together, never worked together before. We've also never worked together since then. So it's not part of an ongoing long partnership. I think there are times where those pre-engagement steps, the trust building and getting to know one another takes a while. There are also times in projects where you might be real familiar with each other. You might have done a couple projects with the same partner, and some of that early partnership building goes much more quickly. And it is less of a, it's unfolding in this messy, organic way than like, let's just sit down and talk this through. And some partners have different cultures around how they do their work. So some partners are going to be messier, non-linear, time goes back and forth a little bit more. And some partners are going to be very precise and very stepwise. And so I'm going to give you the terrible community engagement answer of it depends. But it depends. I would not say all projects are messy and unfold in these very organic, loopy kind of ways. Some are more set. Some you sit down, you talk to the teachers, you figure it out. This is the curriculum, and you kind of set it out very firmly. So it just depends.
There's someone in the Zoom hand raised.
Okay, we have a question. Would someone like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, this is Jones Sartori again, Animal Food Sciences. So just would like to hear your thoughts about when you add layers on the partnership. So just a quick example, so far you can work directly with a specific community, or you can work with an association that works with this community. So could you share some thoughts, some challenges when you add layers, please?
Sure. And many community engagement projects have those layers. You know, if you're collaborating with public libraries, they're the public library staff and the patrons. If you are collaborating with a school, you might have school teachers and school kids. If you're collaborating with an association of ranchers, you might have the association itself, and then you might have the member ranchers. And you may also, somewhere floating around there, have ranchers that are not part of the association if you want to talk to them too. So how that collaboration looks like in those different layers may be closer collaboration in some stages with some parts, and in other parts, maybe you're not talking to them so much. So an example I have, which I think will help, I have a graduate student working with the Detroit Police Athletic League, and she is working on understanding why African-American middle school girls do not want to play sports in high school. Like, they don't want to go to gym class. They're going to skip gym class. They don't want to go to gym class. And the Detroit Police Athletic League is all about youth sports, positive youth development. They do programs in schools and help. And so there's this mystery about this lack of participation. So the student is collaborating with the Detroit Police Athletic League as an organization, but she's also collaborating with school teachers and gym teachers in some schools. And she's also interviewing and talking to the youth. So there are different collaborations, there are different conversations, there's different language, there are different ways each of those layers are weighing into the project. When she comes up with the findings, she gives them back to the youth, she gives them back to the Detroit Police Athletic League, but then she also says, who really needs to know these findings? It's probably not only the young people in the school. It's probably the entire Michigan High School Athletic League Association, who does all the training for all the coaches for all the high schools in our state. And so that she collaborates with that association on the dissemination of results. So it can be on your abacus, you have different partners on your community side in different steps. So helping define the problem might have been the Detroit Police Athletic League and the high school teachers. Helping understand the issue might be the school students themselves, and helping with the dissemination down here was more partnering a little bit with the Detroit Police Athletic League and a lot with that big association. So when you would make your partnership map, you might include all the people, but you might color code them to match different steps, like planning steps for these people, middle project for these people, dissemination for these people. So you might think about it layered that way. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you for your question, because it's important to think about those layers. I do really appreciate that. So let me tell you a little bit about publishing in the smidgen amount of time we have left. Understanding who did what when in your partnership when you write it up is an issue. Use the abacus tool, find another way of talking about that. Talk about who your who is. When you say, I did this and my partners did that, which partners? Just back to this example, clarify which groups were weighing in how. Make a partnership diagram. It might look very nice like this. My partnership diagrams look more like that. I've got a core group, and then I've got like a layer of people I kind of talk to, and then I have some people out there I kind of talk to sometimes, and like we all kind of work together. And my partnership maps often do not look as nice as tidy as this. They look a little more networked, a little more loosely linked together. Tell us your partnership maps. Talk to us about how the project unfolded. I'm going to skip ahead. These are all in your PowerPoints. Talk to us about the process. This is a great process table. Month 1, we did this. Month 2, we did that. Month 3, we did this. If you were to look closely, you could see findings from month 1 ended up in month 2, ended up in month 3. You can see the loops in the process. But what I really want to tell you about is, we're skipping. It's fine. Just don't look for a minute. I want to tell you about this. Right here. All of you put a lot of time and work into your partnerships. Blood, sweat, tears, maybe swear words. You work really hard on your partnerships. You put a lot of time into that trust building. And as you start to unpack that experience and share that experience out, one of the things that's really good to do is to unpack that in a big, broad way. To think about all the things you might say about your partnership. That's this part of the diagram, right? And the figure 8 we talked about. And all the things you might do. So as you start, this is a fern, as you start to unfurl your fern leaf of your partnership, think about all the different things you might write about. Every project can be 5 different things if you wanted to. You can describe the conceptual theory, the project theory, your partnerships. You can talk about the methods and processes. You can do a program description or a case study. Most of you are used to writing about the findings. Community engagement folks have findings all different ways. On you, the students, the community, the broader community, your department, because you then told your department interesting things. And you can write about your reflections. That first piece I wrote about the matter of origins was a reflective piece on what it was like to experience that collaboration. One of the things I think it's really important to do as a community engaged scholar is to unfurl your project. Tell us about all the things that happen, not simply the findings. You can write about the process. You can write about the reflections. And so there is an unfurling tool for you in the folder. There's an article that goes with it. But basically what it says is for any topic you have, you can strategize whether you're going to write about it in a disciplinary journal or an interdisciplinary community engagement journal. And then within those, there are interdisciplinary research, teaching and learning methods, community engagement. Some of your disciplines have community engagement journals in them now. Engineering has one, for example. Philosophy has a community engagement philosophy journal. Think about what type of article you want to write, and then start to think about where you want to share that for academic audiences and where you want to share that for your public audiences. Brainstorm. You obviously will use this tool back and forth, because what might seem like one idea is actually 2 journal articles. You have to go back and rethink it. Think about unpacking that process and writing and sharing as much as you can. Not because you work at a Research One university and need to have a lot of things that count, because we know that. And no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to open this blank page and write an article because of that. But you've had an amazing experience. You've done an innovative thing. You have done something no one else has done with your community partners. And you want to share that story out to other people so they can learn from your experience and build from what you have done that's so amazing and different and interesting. And take the little nuggets that you had, those little bits and pieces of new theory, and build upon that. If you don't write about your experience, you don't take it to a conference, all of that learning stays locally. You know it, your partners know it, and no one else knows it. So the reason to share that out is to talk about the messy parts and the exciting parts, and the parts where you end up with a physicist and a choreographer and a community engagement scholar walk into an NSF grant. You're like, what is happening? You can write about those things and people can look at them and go, that happened to me too. I never thought about that. That it's really an important process to think about making sure that foundational scholarship is there so you can write about it later on, making sure you're collecting the evaluation pieces along the way. Someone asked about that earlier on Zoom. Collect the ideas as you go, and then share it out as broadly as you can. Because that will help you be successful as a community engaged scholar and practitioner and artist and activist. Will also make our whole field better. Because the cool stuff you're doing, we can learn from. So I'm going to end on that slide. It's also purple. I'm sure you noticed that. What questions can I answer for you about any of the tools from the second half? We had inclusion tools. We had partnership, power sharing, who does what when tools. And now we've had an unfurling or unpacking your writing tool. Questions on the tools? And do we have questions in the Zoom? Not yet. Not yet. Yes.
I guess just talking to faculty across campus, what often seems to be the issue with unfurling and sharing your information is then there's sometimes criticism. It's maybe not shared with the right journals. It's not ranked as highly. And I think that's a obstacle that's hard for researchers to overcome sometime.
So when you're in a department that has such things, and there is something right here, I think. No. When you're in a department that has, an implicit list, we talked about explicit and tacit. There's explicit and implicit. Like everybody knows what the right journals are, but no one actually wrote them down and no one remembered to tell you as a junior faculty. Ask. Ask a recently tenured person in your department. Do not ask the senior scholar. The rules for them were different than the rules for you now. At least at Michigan State, the rules are vastly different. Ask, what are the journals that you recommend that I publish in? Ask your department chair. Ask people in your college what that looks like. Ask about numbers of publications. Ask about, is there a weighting? Is a research finding article more important than a scholarship of teaching and learning article? Ask some questions to see what those invisible rules are, and then the extent to which you can follow them or push back on them. Some of the community engagement journals will write you a letter that will say, this is our acceptance rate. They will say, and the acceptance rates for some of them are actually much lower than you would imagine. They turn away a lot of good work because it's not good enough. They've raised the bar on many of them. They'll write that letter that can go in your packet if you want to put one in a community engagement journal. And there are 2 pieces in the folder that help you with that. Ask questions. Ask questions is what I would suggest. Connect to the national organizations. They will help you with some of that. So there's a list of national organizations. There's also a list, I think, as we're talking about success strategies. There is a list of awards. So for your community engagement, whether it's your teaching or your research, apply to have your work recognized by external groups that says nationally, you are one of the top service learning people in the country this year. Nationally, the American Academy for the Advancement of Science says you are awesome and outstanding. Become a fellow at the Advancing Research Impact in Society, get an award from them. None of that hurts your academic success.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know about these, and a lot of people don't think to apply for them.
Yeah, I guess it's a matter of educating the culture, in academia is just like this is something new into academia. So there it isn't the one of the university's goals, but at the time of evaluation, it has to be remembered, Oh, so when you write your research statement, you have to say, oh, as meeting one of the university goals, engaging some scholarship.
And linking it to the university goals is great. Linking it to goals in your discipline is also great. I think about, for those of you who ever were dancers, there's a lead foot and a following foot, I think. The lead foot can be your discipline's questions. In my field, as this kind of researcher, these are the things I am curious about. I just so happen to be going about it as a community engagement approach. Tie back to the university's goals, but tie back to the disciplinary questions and the big issues of the time. And say the community engagement is a way you're getting there. Same with your teaching. I'm an outstanding teacher. I believe in high impact practices for undergraduates and graduate students. This is how I'm evolving my teaching. And one of the ways I'm doing that is through an engagement approach. No one questions a bench scientist who says, one of the ways I'm teaching undergraduates is using a lab approach. That's okay, that's accepted. So you're teaching and you're just using this approach for that teaching. It's a thing that's important to do, to kind of make that tie, and to not have the community engagement be floating off there somewhere as a thing you're just doing because it's important to you. You should do that. You should, in writing for the third audience, your disciplinary peers is an audience, your practitioners is an audience, your institution is the third audience. You need to speak and think like the institution wants you to talk to them. And so tie it to the goals, tie it to your discipline, tie it to being a successful, wonderful faculty member that you are. Say those things to that third audience because they think differently. Any other last questions? I obviously could talk all day with you, but you've been here a very long time. Are there any questions in the chat from Zoom folks?
No, just thank yous.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will end with thank yous to all of you for sticking around for 3 hours this morning, which is a really long time. There are extra things in your Google Drive. You have my email on the first slide of the presentation. I am really happy to get an email 4 months from now. Hi, I saw your Texas Tech. I have this question for you. Remember me? Can we have a Zoom and talk about something? Every conversation I have with each of you, I learn more. So do not be shy about that. I actually really appreciate those conversations. So thank you very much. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, so we will send the link out, and in fact, Lindsay may already have sent the link to the Google Drive, so you will get access to